sometimes controversial, always politically incorrect, and pro-life without exception, without compromise, and without apology. It's the Pro-Life America podcast with your hosts, Sarah Waits and the president of Life Dynamics, Mark Crutcher.
Hey guys, welcome back. It's nice to have you with us. I'm Mark Crutcher, as you heard, and as you also heard, lurking nearby is Sarah Waits.
Hello, everyone. Well, Mark, I'm a huge fan of the Wired interviews that they do with people based on Google Autocomplete, which is where they take the most Googled questions about something and then they ask somebody about that. So I thought today we would do a show on the most Googled questions about abortion, or at least as much as we can tell from Google, because we know that they skew algorithms and
They
such.
lie.
We're going to tap into your vast knowledge.
Okay.
Open your noggin here.
My noggin is deteriorating by the moment, so
We have to get to it rapidly.
let's get to it quick.
Okay. So we'll start out briefly with the political stuff, because we've talked about the political stuff before, and I'll have links to that in the description. So we're just going to breeze through this part. The first question is abortion a constitutional right?
Well, obviously it's not.
It's not, but you would be surprised how many people believe that it is a constitutional right.
Well, we're talking about a population now that believes the first female Supreme Court justice was Judge Judy. So
That's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard.
let's don't get too far down the trail on what people believe.
But you have to admit, that would have been an interesting turnout if she had been.
Oh, Lord. Anyway, the right to abortion, the so-called right to abortion, was found by the 1973 Supreme Court. And what they said was emanating from a penumbra,
Which means shadow.
a shadow of the Constitution. So while the word abortion is not in the Constitution, they said that the constitutional right to privacy cast a shadow that was big enough to include abortion. One of the problems with that argument is the word privacy is not mentioned in the Constitution.
If you look at other cases that deal with privacy, not even the government can tell you what is included in that right to privacy. It's real nebulous.
They take the attitude that someone once said about pornography. They said, I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. And that was a Supreme Court justice saying that.
Yeah.
But anyway, they found the right to privacy emanating from a penumbra of the Constitution. Now, even some pro-aborts have said that this was one of the reasons Roe was poorly decided. Even Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that finding the right to abortion and the right to privacy was
A bad basis.
a bad idea, that it was not a constitutional basis for that. Her argument was that it should be found in the equal protection of the law, but that's another issue.
And that's why there's been so many cases that have been up challenging it, and why eventually the pro-choice side is anticipating that Roe will be overturned.
Yeah, and you've had other pro-aborts on the Supreme Court say things like Roe is on a collision course with itself because it really can't sustain the argument that was made to create the right to abortion. So this is a right that was basically
Manufactured.
Yeah, they manufactured it. And I've always said that what the Supreme Court did in that situation was basically the way a lot of Christians put their own interpretation on the Bible. I saw some pro-abortion preacher the other day, a woman minister, saying that the right to abortion is clearly in the Bible.
Claiming that the Bible supports abortion and all that junk.
And that's the way that the Supreme Court dealt with the Constitution.
Yeah.
Is they said, we can twist it around to find whatever we want to find. So the simple question, the answer is no. There's no such thing as a right to abortion in the Constitution. And that's what the Supreme Court appears to be ready to say.
And that leaked decision, that's basically what they're admitting.
They're saying that it should have never been at the Supreme Court level. It should be handled at the states.
Next question is, what abortion is legal?
Well, all abortions are legal. Roe versus Wade, it was a real political trick that Blackmun used, the guy who wrote Roe versus Wade. They knew the American public was not ready for abortion on demand. There had already been cases in several states in the years or so leading up to Roe where abortion had been rejected by the voters. So they knew the public did not want abortion on demand. But that's what they wanted. So what they did was very clever. They put Roe versus Wade out there because they knew that would be the decision that got all the attention. And they put restrictions in Roe.
Prior to viability, everything is game, but post-viability, states could, not necessarily had to, but could impose restrictions.
They could impose restrictions as long as those restrictions didn't affect the health of the woman. Then they rule in another case that was released the exact same day, companion decision to Roe versus Wade, that most people never heard about, called Doe versus Bolton. And in Doe versus Bolton, they put wording in there that defines health. Usually these decisions have a definition section in them.
Yeah.
So they define what terms might be ambiguous or might be open to interpretation. Roe didn't have one because they knew that if they defined health so broadly that people would say, well, these restrictions don't mean anything. So what they did is they issue Roe with a bunch of restrictions in it. Then they issue Doe versus Bolton the same day, and they take all the restrictions out.
Because Doe versus Bolton basically says anything that might affect the life of the mother. Physical, mental.
Psychological, familial, the woman's age. But they didn't say too old or too young. They just said age. So by the text of Doe versus Bolton, you could have two women going into the same abortion clinic on the same day, 25 years old. And one of them says, I think I'm too young to have a baby. And the other one says, I think I'm too old to have a baby. And it fits the model.
Yeah.
And the catch-all phrase, relevant to the well-being of the patient.
Yeah.
A woman can claim anything is relevant to her well-being. So it was real clever. They put restrictions in Roe, then they took them out in Doe. And since then, when you hear the pro-abort, especially politicians, talk about, what do you believe about abortion? Oh, I support the compromise found in Roe. There is no compromise. Of course, pretty soon that doesn't matter if it's gone. But it was a perfect example of how politicized the United States Supreme Court has become. Roe, like many other decisions since then on a lot of subjects, had nothing to do with the Constitution. It had to do with politics.
Yeah. The next question is abortion legal in all states? And like we covered in the previous one, states can impose restrictions, but they don't necessarily have to, according to Roe versus Wade. There are a number of states where they allow it up to 15 weeks. Some allow it up to 20 weeks. There's only 4 states that allow it up to 24 weeks. Of course, if Roe is overturned, what's going to happen is 9 states have trigger bans, 9 states have pre-Roe bans, 12 states allow abortion up to viability, and then there's only 5 states that will allow it throughout pregnancy.
Well, we don't know that that's what's going to happen.
That's what's on the books right now.
That's the operating
Now, states
theory.
can choose at that point, if Roe is overturned, what they're going to do. But
Yeah, everything's on the table. There's nothing that's off the table here. But yes, abortion is legal in all 50 states.
Yeah, because that health of the mother thing just basically...
Health, yeah. You cannot name a circumstance under which a woman is pregnant that the health exception in Doe doesn't apply. Now, one of the questions I have is, if you overturn Roe, which it looks like they're going to do, but you don't touch Doe, does that definition of health remain in effect? So therefore,
I would think so.
I don't know. So therefore, in effect, if you had a state that said, we outlaw abortion except when it impacts the mother's life or health, does that mean that they didn't pass any restrictions on abortion? And I think the pro-aborts are going to try that little stunt.
Yeah, that's something to think about, definitely.
So what we need to make sure our politicians understand, there shouldn't be any exceptions. But if you're going to put a health exception in the bill,
You need to define what that is.
put a definition section in there to tell what health is, not the Doe versus Bolton.
Well, the
definition.
question I have in response to that is there's this struggle between federal versus state. And typically the rule is that federal trumps state. So if a state has this health exception but very narrowly defines that, could then it be challenged to the Supreme Court and then the Supreme Court say, wait, health is defined in Doe.
Yeah.
Your state's health of the mother thing violates Doe.
Right.
So
Who knows what's going to happen? I
Yeah.
mean, like I said, this is going to be a Wild West shootout once it starts. Yeah. Matt Dillon never saw anything like this, believe me.
So speaking of how the pro-choice side manipulates things, the next question is, does abortion reduce crime?
Well, this is another one of the eugenics arguments
Yeah, exactly.
that we touched on in Alpha 21.
And I'll put the link to that in the description. If you have not seen that, you really need to go watch it.
There have been pro-abortion writers who have made this argument. And, you know, we're always the ones, when I say we, I mean people on the conservative or Republican pro-life side who are accused of being racist. There's nothing more racist than this particular argument. I have even heard these people argue that A, blacks commit more crimes than whites, B, blacks have abortions at a higher rate than whites, so therefore C, abortion reduces crime. That's the basis of their argument, that we do away with all the undesirable people. And going back to Ginsburg, we put a quote of hers in my Alpha 21 where she said that Roe basically did away with a lot of people. I don't have the quote in front of me, but basically did away with a lot of people that we don't want to have too many of anyway. What
and
is
Sanger
she saying?
said the same thing almost.
Yeah. So
Different words, but same concept.
Right. So what are they saying?
Who do they decide is undesirable?
In other words, are they saying that we have too many white people in the world? Do we have too many rich white people in the world?
Do we have too many yuppies in the world?
Yeah. Is that what they're saying? No.
No,
When they make that argument, what they're saying is we have too many blacks in the world.
And too many
That's
poor
what
people.
they're saying. And it's another example of how the pro-choice movement is part of the eugenics movement. They're one and the same group of people.
Yeah, and to show you the bias of Google on this. So when I saw that this was a question that was popping up in Google, I went to see what Google suggested in its top results. And of course, Google will show a snippet of its top most recommended result. It shows a Stanford research article as the top answer that claims that legalized abortion is estimated to have reduced violent crime by 47% and property crime by over 33%. So basically, yes, abortion reduces crime, and it's so wonderful.
Yeah. And we have such safe streets now. I mean,
yeah.
the crime is just almost unheard of in America. I think it'd be interesting if you had the money to do a study on that, to show, for example, in the places where the abortion rate is the highest, I bet you're going to find the crime rate is the highest too.
I wouldn't be surprised.
And that doesn't even count the fact that abortion is itself a crime. It's a crime against humanity. It may be legal, but it's a crime against humanity.
Since we're talking about eugenics here, there was one question that popped up that I thought was real interesting. And it was, has Bill Gates donated to Planned Parenthood?
Billions, with a B.
Yeah. And the reason why this has come up is because Bill Gates and Melinda Gates are kind of involved in a lot of that eugenics type programs. So the Gates Foundation, since its founding in 2000, has given $81 million to Planned Parenthood. Now, most of that went to their international affiliates, according to their grants database. The foundation's donations to Planned Parenthood stopped in 2007, but in 2021, the Gates Foundation made a 2-year, $8.5 million pledge to fund the quote, Family Planning 2030 Support Network as part of a larger $1.4 billion 5-year commitment to supporting family planning and women's health globally.
Bill and Melinda Gates are eugenicists. Make no mistake about it. And they're joined by people like, of course, Warren Buffett and George Soros, and the list goes on and on. And by the way, we're going to have a future show on this issue.
Yeah, this is a good issue to talk
Matter
about.
of fact, we may have to have 2 or 3 shows consecutively on this issue because it gets pretty involved. You know, when we studied eugenics for Alpha 21, you go back into the 1800s and you see all these high-dollar eugenicists like Rockefellers and the Carnegies and all these ultra super wealthy people that are putting their fortunes into the eugenics movement. And it's tempting to look and say, well, we don't have those kind of people anymore. Eugenics isn't funded. Eugenics is funded more today as a proportion of what it takes. You can't say that $1 in 1850 was the same as $1 in 2022.
No, absolutely not.
The money that these eugenicists are spending right now dwarfs what the Carnegies and the Rockefellers spent back in those days. It's not even remotely close. Now, they've learned some tricks over the years to not be so public with some of their pronouncements. They don't come out and say, like the early eugenicists said, we're here to get rid of these black people. You know, they're going to overrun our country if we don't get rid of them. They don't say that, but that's the way they act.
But we'll do a show on that later on.
Yes, we're going to do a show on this eugenics issue and where all this money's coming from. And I'll tell you, you're going to be surprised at where some of the money's coming from.
All right, switching gears, let's talk about the medical stuff. What abortion procedures are there? So what are the different types of abortion procedures?
Well, there's all kinds. Of course, the most common is the DNC, dilation and curettage. And that's used in early term abortions.
And that's where
up to about 12 weeks.
And that's where a mother's cervix is dilated and a curette is scraped along the sides of the uterus to dislodge the baby.
And then suctioned out. That's the most common, especially in early trimester abortions. In later abortions, you have more varied procedures. The most common among those is D&E.
Which stands for dilation and extraction.
or dilation and evacuation. Sometimes it's listed one way, sometimes it's listed the other, but it's the same thing. And in that situation there, they dilate the cervix more than they do in the early abortions because they're going to be using bigger instruments and they're going to be pulling out baby parts that are bigger.
How do they dilate that? Because a lot of people don't know how that's done, and I think it's kind of interesting.
Well, the primary way it's done is through a product called laminaria.
And what is laminaria for those of you who don't know? Because this is where I think it's like, what? They do what now?
It's compressed seaweed. And
Compressed seaweed, ladies and gentlemen.
and they compress it down to these little sticks. And it's like a sponge. It expands.
It expands.
That's what laminaria does. So they'll put laminaria sticks, and we've had cases where they put up to 20 and 30 of them in a woman.
20 and 30 laminaria
Sticks. Or sometimes they'll just use fewer number but bigger diameter sticks. They have them in all different diameters and sizes. But it takes moisture from around the cervical opening and dilates that laminaria.
Over time, it just kind of slowly opens it up.
And this usually requires a 2-day procedure. You go 1 day for the laminaria, and then you go back the second day. They take the laminaria out and then do the abortion. But in that case, they just rip the baby apart. They pull off an arm and leg and then a head, and then pull out the torso.
After they have gotten what they think is all the pieces of the baby, they use a curette to scrape any parts off of the sides of the uterus, and then they use a suction machine to get any debris that are left.
Basically it becomes a DNC after that point.
And then what they do is they take the pieces of the baby, put it on a tray, and then they assemble it to make sure, or try to make sure, that they've got all of the parts.
That's what they're supposed to do. They don't always do it. And that's why you'll see women dying from their safe and legal abortions. They die. It's very common. We've got a list of several hundred of them on our website. And what happens is if you leave part of that baby behind, that material will become necrotic, which means it's dead, and it'll start to rot, decay.
And that causes an infection.
Causes sepsis or a septic infection, and the woman can die from that. So that's a typical second trimester abortion. Then third trimester, you have basically the same procedures. Now they're doing more and more intact abortions.
What are those?
Well, they'll give the woman a drug that will cause her to expel the baby, and very often the baby's expelled intact. And of course, we've seen that in our Babies Born Alive Daily video that we did, and everybody needs to go online and watch that.
Yeah, we'll have the link to that in the description as well.
But yeah, the babies come out intact, and sometimes they come out still alive. And then the abortionist will kill them outside the womb. And those are in very late-term abortions. We also had, of course, a big battle for several years here over DNX abortions, or what were called partial birth abortions, where the baby is partially delivered.
They deliver everything but the head, and then they'll snip the spinal cord.
Right. They use a pair of scissors to push them into the back of the baby's head and snip the spinal cord, and the baby, of course, dies.
And the reason they like to do that is because it reduces the chances of malpractice dramatically, because there's not any retained fetal parts or anything like that.
Yeah, you get the baby out intact. You don't have to worry too much about retained fetal parts. You'll have some parts that will stay behind, not parts of the baby, but parts of the placenta or other material that stay behind that you have to get. But the incidence of that goes way down.
And of course, if you're selling aborted baby parts, then that's even better for you, because you can custom harvest those parts the way you want.
If you haven't ditched the baby, that's what it's called in the abortion industry, where you ditch it's for digoxin.
Which is a chemical that they use to kill the baby, right?
They'll insert the chemical into the baby's brain while it's still in utero, and that digoxin will cause the baby's body to soften and make it easier to expel. It will also cause fetal demise at the time, so you don't have to worry about a live birth if you ditch the baby.
But a lot of those people who request parts, they don't want that in there because it damages the tissue.
We've got orders, because we were the group that revealed the trafficking in body parts that David DeLayden later on redid. We've got them where they'll say, we can't take a baby that's been ditched. It changes the biology, and we can't use the parts if they've been ditched. So anybody who thinks that's not still going on is a dreamer.
Yeah.
But what was
it's
interesting,
too lucrative.
Yeah. And what was interesting is during the testimony in Congress about partial birth abortion, one of the things that was asked, and I don't remember who it was, it might have been Rick Santorum that asked the question to some pro-abort senator that was in the hearing. The question was, if you're pulling the baby out of the womb so that only the head is remaining in the womb, so that you can technically still call it an abortion. In your mind, you can convince yourself that it's still an abortion.
Because the baby's not fully delivered.
Right. What if the baby happens to slip out and is still alive?
And that's
Now,
not uncommon.
Yeah, it's not uncommon. The question was, do you have an obligation to provide life-saving medical treatment to that baby? And they hopscotched all around it. The pro aborts hopscotched all around that question. But when they were pressed on it, and it was clear they have to answer, their basic answer was, the woman goes into an abortion to have a dead baby. She's entitled to a dead baby.
What do you expect from these people?
That may be the origin of some of these people now that are saying there ought to be a certain time after birth that parents can decide whether they've bonded with the baby or haven't bonded, or they want the baby or don't want the baby. And if not, the baby can be euthanized. So if you're pro-choice and you say, I'm pro-choice, but I'm not for all that, don't give me that crap. If you're pro-choice, you signed up for this. You opened the door for it the first time you did your first trimester abortion. Because you cannot tell me a time from the moment of fertilization to the moment of natural death at 80 or 90 years old. You cannot tell me a time when that entity is not a living human being. So therefore, don't let these people get on their moral high horse because they only support early abortions.
Speaking of all these abortion procedures, one of the other big questions is, how long does an abortion take?
Well, if you're talking about a D&C, the early ones, they can take 5 to 10 minutes. If you're talking about one of these later abortions where you're doing it as a D&E, it can take a long time. If you watch that video, Babies Born Alive Daily video that we put on the interview with 3 women from an abortion clinic in Houston, they were saying that it could take an hour and that it's a lot of work. They said the abortionists will come out there drenched in sweat, wrestling, trying to get that baby ripped apart so he can get it out. So it depends on which procedure you're talking about and how late the baby is as to how long it takes. But really, the issue of how long it takes is irrelevant anyway.
So the next question is abortion painful?
I've had women that we've dealt with here that have told me it was the most painful thing they ever went through in their life. But as far as the baby's concerned, the pro-aborts don't want to talk about this issue because that's in pain you're inflicting intentionally on someone else if the baby feels pain. But the fact is that you can see sonogram images of where they touch a baby and the baby will respond to it. And in the case of twins, sometimes one baby will touch the other one and respond to it. So obviously they have sensors that feel touch. That means they'd have to feel pain. There was a study in England several years ago because some pro-aborts had come out and say, well, we don't really know when the unborn child feels pain, so it's okay for us to kill them.
Since we don't know.
Since we don't know. We don't really know if
Not going to err on the side of caution here,
Right.
but since they don't know.
Yeah, which is nonsense.
Yeah.
But some medical team over there did a research project, and they said that there can be reasons to believe that pain is felt by the baby well into the first part of the pregnancy, and that the pain may actually be more intense then than it is later in the pregnancy.
It kind of makes sense, whenever you hurt yourself, the new skin that's coming up is usually more sensitive than the final product.
Yeah, but again, the real issue here goes back to what you said, which is if we don't know, then why wouldn't we just assume? We know that, for example, when a baby comes out of the womb,
Yeah.
that it feels pain right then. We can demonstrate that very easily. Now, are we going to say that 30 minutes earlier, when it was still in the womb, it didn't feel pain?
Yeah.
In other words, something miraculous happened.
The magical birth canal argument.
Right. The magical birth canal. So now we're inside the womb with a baby that we know feels pain. How far back are you willing to go and say, I don't care if the baby feels pain. The baby's got to go. The baby's got to die. And I would point out something else to you on that particular issue. We now know that it's not uncommon for doctors to perform fetal surgery. And they take the baby out of the mother's womb, umbilical cord still hooked up. They put the baby on her chest, and they can perform surgery on that baby, then put it back in the womb. No doctor is going to do this without anesthetizing that baby. So let's say that baby's 15 weeks old, and this doctor says, well, he needs to be anesthetized so I can do this heart surgery on him. Well, then why doesn't he need to be anesthetized if he's going to do an abortion on him? In other words, he feels pain.
Yeah.
Right? We had a lawyer several years ago call us. He had been on the state legislature. I think it was in Arizona. And he said one time there was a bill that was brought up to require that when veterinarians would have to do an abortion on a dog or a cat or a horse or whatever it might be, that the unborn dog, cat, or horse, whatever it was, had to be anesthetized. And he said that one of the big objections they had to this, he said everybody was saying, okay, that seems reasonable, was the abortion lobby saying, wait a minute, you do that for dogs, somebody's going to want to do this for human beings, the babies that we're killing. And so apparently the thing failed. I don't know exactly what happened to it. But
because it's abortion no matter what. Wow.
Yeah, they're entitled to a dead baby. And it doesn't matter if the baby feels excruciating pain in the process. Oh, well.
Another big question is, what is the process for the abortion pill?
It depends on what the abortion clinic wants to do. Because there's a process that Danco and the company that developed RU46, Rusal Clough, they had a protocol for using RU46 that the abortion clinics aren't using anymore.
Because it's too expensive to do it the right way.
If you do it the right way. You were supposed to have a sonogram with each one. That's not happening. You were supposed to give it in 600 milligram dosages. That's not happening. They're doing 200 milligram dosages, which increases the chances that it won't work, which then, guess what that does? It increases the chances that you'll have to sell that woman a mechanical abortion now, and you'll actually sell her 2 abortions. So you get 2 abortions out of one abortion client.
Operation Rescue just came out with a report talking about 2021-2022 side complications from the abortion pill. And one of the things that they found was that a lot of times the chemical abortion did not work and they had to follow it up with a mechanical abortion.
Right.
So I'll put the link to that in the description. There's other things there in that report as well.
Oh, there's reasons it can't work, even if you do everything right. But the fact is, they're not doing everything right anyway.
The next question, what is an incomplete abortion?
That's an abortion where they don't get the entire baby.
And you have retained fetal parts.
You have retained fetal parts, and then you're exposed to what we talked about earlier, septic infection and all the things that result from that.
What is missed abortion?
Well, it's basically the same thing as an incomplete abortion. You don't get everything. Or in some cases, they'll label something a missed abortion if they didn't get anything. They'll evacuate the uterus, but there's no chorionic villi there, and so there's theoretically the woman's still pregnant.
Assuming she was pregnant in the first place.
Assuming that she was pregnant in the first place.
Can abortion cause infertility, and how?
It can leave you sterile, which the abortion industry will claim doesn't happen. They're lying through their teeth. You have this uterine scarring caused by the curette, or usually curette, not the suction machine so much, but usually the curette causes uterine scarring. And a fertilized egg will not attach to scar tissue.
Yeah.
So it bounces around the uterus until it finds clean tissue. The place where the clean tissue is most likely to be found, because it wasn't scarred, is right in the opening of the cervix.
Which is a really bad place.
Which you do not want the baby attaching there, because then the placenta can grow over the cervical opening. And you have things like placenta previa. If the baby does not implant, then obviously there's no pregnancy. But this is one of the reasons that an abortion can cause sterility or infertility for future pregnancies. It can also cause some health problems with future pregnancies.
There are a lot of complications and side effects, and so we will put a link to
and breast cancer,
more
of course,
information on that. But
is one that we've talked about for years.
Yeah, we have a really good episode on that. It's an interview with Angela Elaine Franchi.
Right.
And she basically studied breast cancer. Like, that was her speciality. And so if you haven't listened to that, I will put the link to that in the description. You should really go listen to that episode. Okay, we just have 3 more questions left, and they're about Planned Parenthood. The first one is insanely funny. Is Planned Parenthood pro-life?
They're pro their life. They like the life that they can get from killing babies and driving Mercedes-Benzes, but no, they're not.
No, they're not pro-life. They do abortions. They're not pro-life.
Not in the accepted definition of the term, no.
Does Planned Parenthood do abortions for free?
Planned Parenthood does not do anything for free. You'll often hear these people say, well, I went to Planned Parenthood and I got this free service and I got this free service and they gave me this. No. You got it for free.
The government
taxpayer paid for it.
Yep.
Planned Parenthood does not do anything for free. Let's make sure people understand that.
And the segue into the last question is Planned Parenthood government/federally funded?
Over $1.5 million.
Absolutely.
Right now, over $1.5 million a day is what Planned Parenthood gets. It's an obscenity.
I know that there's questions that people have out there about abortion. So if there's a question you have about abortion that was not included in this, make sure you go to lifedynamics.com/podcast. Leave that question there. You know, we love to hear questions from you guys. We may cover it in another episode. We may do another one of these because we like to do interesting and unique things.
And just tell us if there's a subject we haven't covered or we haven't covered to the extent that you want to see it covered. let us know. I mean, we're here to serve you. We're not here to just entertain ourselves on this podcast. We want to hear from you guys. If you have a question, and if you're a pro-abort and you think something we've said is not right,
challenge us on it.
Challenge us on it. Call us. We might put you on the show. Who knows?
Yeah, we're not shy.
Yep. We had pro-aborts on our old Life Talk show. So if you think you can handle it, just join up.
Yep.
Until next Thursday, remember, Life Dynamics is not here to put up a good fight.
We're here to win.
Because winning is how the killing stops. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye, guys.